In Boston, the former mob boss Whitey Bulger is on trial for 19 murders. Today, he didn't flinch as his one-time right-hand man described how Bulger killed, frequently, in cold blood. But something else that the witness said made Bulger go ballistic today, and Don Daler was in the courthouse.
Near the end of Kevin Weeks' testimony, he called his former boss a rat. In front of the jury, the two men shouted at each other, "Blank you." The judge had to restore order. Weeks is a confessed killer who considered James Whitey Bulger his mentor for almost 20 years. Today, Weeks described for the court several murders he said he saw Bulger commit. He took a couple steps, and Bulger put the MAC-10 to the back of his head and pulled the trigger. Jim Bulger took out a rope, wrapped it around his neck, and started strangling him. Then there was the stepdaughter of a fellow gangster Bulger was allegedly concerned would talk to police. "She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't involved with us in any crimes. I heard a thud, and I looked and saw Jim Bulger on the ground, choking her." Weeks testified he and Bulger also wanted to kill Boston Herald columnist Howie Carr, who has reported on Bulger's gang for decades.
So how do you think it's going for Mr. Bulger right now?
I think it's all, as Whitey said in a letter this spring, this is the end of the trail for me. He hasn't got a prayer.
What does Whitey Bulger have to do with the Karen Read retrial coming up in January 2025? Well, I'll tell you in a bit. Hold on to your seats because we are about to find out. DA Michael Morrissey has hired former prosecutor turned defense attorney Hank Brennan as a special assistant district attorney assigned to the Karen Read case. He will work with assistant district attorney Adam Lally and the others in the prosecution team. But guess what? You're never going to guess this. He was on the defense team for one of the most notorious mobsters. Yes, you heard me right. He was Whitey Bulger's attorney in 2013. That clip we just saw at the beginning of this video. That case was fraught with alleged corruption within the FBI. So why would the DA bring in a mob attorney to prosecute Karen Read? I'm sure the defense team for Karen Read is not too worried considering Brennan lost that case and his client was found guilty on all 31 charges but one and went to prison at 83 years old for life plus 30 years. So I'm not from the area, so I didn't know who Hank Brennan at law was. So let's meet him. I found this interview that he did several years back after his client Whitey Bulger was sentenced to prison. So here, let's have a watch.
Now, Hank Brennan, a member of Whitey Bulger's defense team, is here. Welcome, Hank Brennan.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a wild 8-10 weeks for you.
It's been a busy year and a half.
How did your client respond today? We just heard Jay Carney, your partner in this, say that he wanted to see that the government was partly culpable. But how did he respond to it's 31 out of 32 counts he was proven guilty?
James Bulger was extraordinarily content. I think the moment for him came well before the verdict. It was the effort and the demonstration in court to help try to show as much truth as we could. The idea that the government has some liability and accountability in what had happened over those decades was one of the most important objectives we had.
One of the oddities of this was to see Stephen Davis and other members of families of victims embracing you and Jay Carney today, and that here you were representing the man who killed their loved ones. What was that like for you to have them almost siding with you in a sense? Not that they didn't want to see the government, convict them, prosecute them and convict them, but they really credit you with bringing out the government part of the corruption.
Well, we expect our criminals to commit crimes. That's what criminals do. We don't expect that from our law enforcement. And so having a very unique opportunity, Jay Carney and I had the ability and the invitation to do anything we could to try to help find the truth and expose what the government had done. And the government had done a number of things that we don't expect from our government. They not only created victims, but they continued to victimize the victims by denying their responsibility. When we started this case, the effort was at the most important part to help show the role the government played in this entire conspiracy. It was a very liberating experience as a defense attorney to be able to ask questions of witnesses which in times could implicate our own client and we did at many points, but also help other people. And I felt the presence of Patricia Donahue and the Donahue family and the Davises behind me every day. I didn't always see them when my back was to them, but I felt their presence, and I knew that what Jay and I, Carney, were doing had some import, not just for our client, but for the community, for particular victims, and also for the public.
Oh, let's find out how he views responsibilities of law enforcement.
You eviscerated Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi in cross-examination. And as a result of that, you could say that you were actually responsible for the no finding in the murder of Deborah Davis, even though everybody knows he was there. He was never there. He was behind it. He, for one reason or another, wanted her dead. And yet, as I said, the family is still saying, well, you know, they want to go further with this. They want to take it to a state court, but they're fine with that.
Well, I take issue with the suggestion that he was there, and I take issue with the fact that you suggest that they wanted him dead.
Her dead.
Or her dead, I'm sorry. The only person who has ever said that is Stephen Flemmi. Mm-hmm. And certainly when a person that vile decides to kill his girlfriend because she has decided she had an interest in somebody else, someone that vile with that type of reward isn't somebody who's reliable. So I absolutely suggest that's not accurate and that's not true.
Well, so far I'm liking what he represents. As we saw in the Karen Reid trial, law enforcement's investigation and the evidence presented didn't have, in my opinion, the integrity I would have expected before you go around charging someone for a serious crime. So how will Brennan, with his moral compass for the process of law, deal with this? Let's have a listen.
Person that vile decides to kill his girlfriend because she has decided she had an interest in somebody else. Someone that vile with that type of reward isn't somebody who's reliable. So I absolutely suggest that's not accurate and that's not true. I think quite the opposite. That being said, in protecting and defending James Bulger at trial, I think we demonstrated through the trial that we didn't pull any punches even if it incriminated James Bulger. Jay Carney and I, at every step, try to bring out the most reliable information. There were many witnesses which I asked about not only the Deborah Davis murder, but also how the FBI was complicit in covering up Stephen Flemmi's misconduct by trying to hide the conversations and interviews with Olga Davis and Mickey Davis. So that was a concerted effort throughout the trial. And sometimes public and people, victims like the Davis family, need somebody to stand up for them, and that's why we rely on prosecutors. That's why we rely on our government to do that. And when they fail, and someone else is there to take the void, and we had an opportunity to do that, for us that was very meaningful.
Now, in that clip, what I heard was that he is saying he's able to see the failings in the evidence. So will he present evidence in the Karen Reid retrial highlighting the flaws to, get ahead of the game, to gain sympathy from the jury maybe? How does he view testimonials for taking the stand? Let's have a listen.
I realized the judge wouldn't allow testimony in that you all wanted, you and Jay Carney, which was that the government offered Whitey Bulger and Stephen Flemmi and Stephen Weeks, to some extent, immunity from prosecution in order to turn evidence against La Cosa Nostra. But why not let your client testify? I know he said he wanted to in the beginning. Jay Carney said he would. Why not?
The arrangement that James Bulger had with the federal government was very different than the arrangement that Stephen Flemmi had. James Bulger was never an informant for the federal government. He was never providing information, and I hope we dispelled that through this trial. It's unfortunate that the general public doesn't see this type of trial on TV, and they can actually look at the detail and the evidence that we help show, because unfortunately it still then becomes a matter of rumor and innuendo. James Bulger not only was prepared to take the stand, he expected to take the stand from day one, and is what he wanted to do. There is a story, a sordid story, that extends well beyond the Boston FBI to the Department of Justice to the highest ranks. And James Bulger was prepared to tell that story. It is a loss for everybody, for the jury, for the victims' families, for the community, for the public, not to have him take the stand. I expected he would have been the most convincing witness, because he'd be the one witness who would not try to protect himself. I think that's reinforced by the approach Jay Carney and I took. But to have somebody take the stand just to give a confession, but not to give the entire story and protect the government, makes absolutely no sense. If the government had no fear of what James Bulger would say, there'd be no reason not to let him testify to his arrangement. If immunity was so absurd, then they simply could have dispelled it in front of the jury. So although the government continually suggests that they're disappointed he didn't testify, they tried to silence him at every turn in this case. And it was an extraordinary loss, because talk about the idea of closure, what better closure could you have than the person who could stand before the jury and the community and say exactly what happened. But fortunately, I don't think this is the last word. It's the end of this trial, but there's perhaps other trials and there's other opportunities for James Bulger to have his voice heard. And this would have been the perfect forum, but the government wanted to deny that, and they effectively did.
Well, did you hear that? He feels strongly about having trials televised. Well, I can agree with him on that. And I kind of get the feeling he thinks it's important for the public to hear the whole story. What do you think? Now, I don't know about you, but I wonder how he judges and treats people. And how did he feel about his client, Whitey Bulger, who was a convicted felon? Oh my gosh, let's have a listen.
Since you brought up the issue of no cameras in the courtroom, which was incredibly frustrating to us in the news media and to the general public, tell us a little bit about working with Whitey Bulger. What was he like? How did you end up liking him? Was he somebody who was very vocal? Did he speak up on his own behalf? How did he interact with you? Just anything.
James Bulger is an extraordinarily intelligent man, and he is captivating. He's a historian. He was an excellent client. He educated, he gave guidance, he was a good listener, and Jay Carney and I had an extraordinary relationship with him. There were a number of things that were introduced to me before we got to trial that helped me assist him, and he was an excellent guide. I try to have an affinity for all my clients. Remember, when someone's charged, they're presumed innocent, and they come to you because they need help. And when you tell them, I'm going to treat you like a family member, you treat them like a family member. And if my brother is going to call me at 2 o'clock on a Friday night, I'm going to take the call. And James Bulger is no different than any other client that Jay and I had ever represented, and no different than a family member once you represent him.
He's 83. Was he completely cogent, lucid? Did he show any signs of illness or?
None. Yeah, he's a captivating speaker. I think he would be absolutely mesmerizing to a jury. And if he does at some point have an interview, I won't need to speak for him. He can speak for himself. But at 83 years old, he's equally, if not more, competent to speak on his behalf than I ever would be.
84 next month. All right, Hank Brennan, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a crazy couple months for you.
Pleasure.
Well, I don't know about you, but I found that interesting. Now let's listen to a juror from the Whitey Bulger's trial, because I'm sure Hank Brennan, took on board how those jurors think. Let's have a listen.
It's been nearly 7 years since infamous mob boss James Whitey Bulger was captured out in California, ending 16 years on the run that many thought would never end. 2 years later, Bulger was sentenced to 2 life sentences for his crimes, including involvement in 11 murders, extortion, and racketeering. For most, that was case closed, the final chapter of Bulger's decades-long saga. But for Janet Euler, one of the jurors who helped put him behind bars, the case is far from settled. Almost immediately after the final gavel, Euler became an outspoken critic about how the trial was handled, soon started trading letters with Bulger and his girlfriend, Catherine Gregg. Euler has since visited both in prison and written a book, a work of fiction of sorts. It's called The Truth Be Damned, loosely based on the events of the trial and its aftermath. Janet joins me now. It's nice to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
I've read you say you regret voting guilty. You should have held out for a not guilty or a hung jury. Why, Janet?
I believe that a lot of things were kept from the jury, and we're supposed to base our decision on fact, and I don't think we got a lot of the fact.
Like what, for example?
The Jeremiah O'Sullivan story and the immunity, or the fact that...
U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yes, or the fact that Jim Bulger wanted to plead guilty and accept whatever sentencing they would give him without appeal.
Including death, theoretically, if they were took care of, or at least were kinder to his to his girlfriend. So, just to be clear, knowing what you now know, if the case were being heard now, if that had been heard in the courtroom, you would have voted not guilty in this case?
I might have held out for a hung jury nullification because I feel, well, let's start with the opening statement by his own attorney, Jay Carney, saying that his client was guilty of most of the crimes. And from that moment on, I realized we were there more for maybe beyond Bulger's criminal activity.
But he was the one who was on trial. I mean, so again, even you're convinced he was participated, if not did, these actual murders,
oh,
right?
Yes, I did.
But you could have voted not guilty despite that fact?
I don't think it was a fair trial, and we all deserve a fair trial.
That was an insightful comment from the juror. So what value do you think Hank Brennan will bring to being part of the prosecution team? Has the brilliant, fast-thinking Alan Jackson met his match? What are your thoughts? By leaving a comment, you may help someone else that will read your comment. And of course, I love to read all comments as they are valued, and together we can be more informed. And this information may help you or someone you know. In the meantime, on this channel, you'll find a variety of playlists to suit every curiosity about the justice system. And we provide you with a visual to information and the process. So please like this video if you like this kind of content. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to be notified when I'm going live or upload another video. I'm Karen Cole from Legal Minded Friends. Information is power, meaning if you know something, you can make decisions that are right for you.